My name is Maya Lynn. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my dream was stolen, until the thief realized it had teeth. It started with a handshake and a lie. Titan Tech looked like everything I had been waiting for. A sleek, fast-moving startup with funding, flexibility, and a clear vision of disrupting the cybersecurity industry. I had come from Microsoft, a place of structure and legacy, where innovation often drowned in bureaucracy. But I hadn't come empty-handed. I brought with me something I had nurtured in secret for years. A system I called Sentinel Shield, designed to detect and adapt to cyber threats before they happened. Not react. Not respond. Predict. I pitched the concept vaguely during my initial interviews, careful to protect my intellectual property. But they were still impressed. Brandon Holt, the CEO, shook my hand at the final meeting and said, "We want you to lead something big here, Maya. Your vision, your system, your future." He smiled. That same smile would haunt me 18 months later. I started from scratch, whiteboarding algorithms, coding prototypes, testing simulations. Titan Tech gave me a lab and a team, but I wrote most of the core code myself. I spent my nights staring into cascading lines of code, my fingers blistered from typing, my brain wired on coffee and ambition. Sentinel Shield wasn't just software, it was my legacy, my purpose. Brandon checked in occasionally, always with that corporate charm. "Brilliant work, Maya," he'd say, peeking into my lab. "The board is ecstatic." But he never really asked questions. Never tried to understand the system. I should have noticed that. Should have known he wasn't interested in building something with me. He was waiting to own it. Then, 3 days ago, I hit the breakthrough. Sentinel Shield didn't just pass its simulation. It evolved. It identified an unknown attack pattern, one even I hadn't coded for, and neutralized it in real time. It learned. It adapted. It did everything I had dreamed of, and more. I rushed to Brandon's office with the news. His assistant, Rachel, squeezed me into a 15-minute slot. That alone should have tipped me off. When I walked in, Brandon wasn't alone. Andrea Fields, the company's general counsel, sat across from him with a folder in her lap and a blank expression on her face. "Have a seat," Brandon said. I did. Laptop in hand, smile still lingering. I thought I was walking into a celebration. Instead, Andrea slid a document across the table. "We need to clarify some concerns regarding your employment agreement," she said, her voice robotic. The room shifted. My chest tightened. Brandon leaned forward. Section 14.3 Maya. Anything developed using company time or resources is legally owned by Titan Tech. I stared at the document. My name, my title, the IP clause, all there in black and white. But Sentinel Shield was my concept. I brought it with me, I argued, opening my laptop, ready to show timestamps, notes, even old GitHub commits. Andrea didn't blink. A concept is not a product. The working system was developed here. I looked at Brandon, the man who had once told me I was the future of his company. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's be honest," he said. "Sentinel Shield belongs to Titan Tech now. You'll receive a generous bonus. $300,000. That's more than fair, Maya." I nearly laughed. Fair. For 18 months of 80-hour weeks, sleepless nights, and code that might revolutionize the entire cybersecurity industry. Fair was the last word I would have used. "And your employment," Andrea continued, "is being transitioned out. Effective immediately." I felt the ground beneath me collapse. They were firing me. After I handed them the crown jewel. After I built their future. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had seen this coming. 6 months ago I got an alert. Someone had accessed my private server, a secure development instance of Sentinel Shield I used for version testing. No data was taken. But the fact that someone had tried triggered a quiet alarm I had built into the system. That was when I started creating the real shield. Not for the network. For myself. I looked at Brandon, then Andrea. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't even argue. Instead, I handed over my laptop and said, Of course, Mr. Holt. Good luck with tomorrow's investor demo. Security walked me out, watching every keystroke as I packed up my desk. I carried my things in a box like any other corporate reject. But I was smiling on the inside. Because 10 minutes into tomorrow's demo, a very specific line of code was going to activate. And then Brandon Holt would finally understand what Betrayal security looked like. He was about to learn that betrayal has a cost. And Sentinel Shield. It wasn't just a system anymore. It was my revenge. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream into my pillow. I didn't pour a glass of wine or call an old friend to vent. Instead, I ordered Thai food, queued up some random episodes of a sitcom I barely paid attention to, and waited. Waited for the notification. Because I knew it would come. At exactly 9:30 p.m., my phone lit up. Incoming call. Rachel, Titan Tech. I let it ring twice before answering. He wants to see you, Rachel said. Her voice was breathless, clipped. At 9:30 at night. I replied, feigning confusion. It's urgent, she said. A car is already on the way. By 10:10 p.m. I was back at Titan Tech, this time in a conference room I had only ever seen from a distance. Polished wood, matte black lighting fixtures, sleek leather chairs surrounding a massive oval table that screamed money and manipulation. Brandon was already inside, disheveled and furious. His tie was undone, hair sticking up at odd angles like he'd been running his hands through it in panicked frustration. His eyes were bloodshot, and his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the table. Fix it, he snapped the moment the door closed behind me. I stepped inside slowly, placing my bag on the chair before me. Fix what? Don't play dumb, he growled. You sabotaged the demo. Sentinel Shield's crashing the system. It's identifying threats that don't exist, flooding the network with false positives. It's unusable. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely impressed. That doesn't sound like something I'd do. After all, you terminated my employment. I haven't touched a line of code in over 24 hours. Security watched me like a hawk while I packed. Brandon slammed his palm down on the table. Don't play games with me, Maya. There's $75 million on the line tomorrow, and you just made me look like an amateur in front of the board. I sat slowly, crossing one leg over the other, my tone calm, cool, and laced with just enough sarcasm to draw blood. I didn't sabotage anything. Sentinel Shield is working exactly as designed. It's detecting threats. He narrowed his eyes. Then why is it turning on itself? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Because Sentinel Shield identifies all threats. Internal, external, corporate. His face lost all color. It was trained on thousands of case studies, I continued, watching his panic build like a rising tide. Including insider threats, data breaches orchestrated by executives, hidden backdoors planted by companies to sell user data. Sentinel Shield learns, Brandon. It adapts. And it documents. Silence fell between us like a guillotine. You taught it to spy on us, he asked, voice low, almost trembling. Smiled. I taught it to protect. And when it sensed you accessing my secure development server 6 months ago, it started watching, recording, building a case. Brandon slumped into the chair across from me, like the weight of what I'd said had finally landed. You can't prove any of this, he whispered. Oh, but Sentinel Shield can. I tilted my head. Every unauthorized login, every file you copied, every line of code you tried to replicate. It's all time-stamped, archived, and attached to network access logs. He went quiet. Then his expression changed. I saw the wheels turn behind his eyes. A new tactic. What do you want? He asked finally. I took my time answering. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a flash drive and placed it on the table, just inches from his shaking hands. Full recognition as Sentinel Shield's creator and lead architect, I said calmly. 50% ownership of all related patents. Board seat. $10 million for your attempted theft. And an official partnership agreement, drafted and signed before tomorrow's demo. He stared at me like I'd just set fire to the table. That's extortion. No, I corrected, folding my hands. That's negotiation. Extortion would be me leaking Sentinel Shield's internal reports to your investors and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He cursed under his breath. This flash drive, I continued, contains the authentication update Sentinel Shield needs to restore proper function. Right now, it's flagging unauthorized commands because its creator, you know me, was removed from the authentication chain. Brandon looked at the drive like it might bite him. And if I don't agree, he asked. Then Sentinel Shield stays broken, I said flatly. Your demo fails. Your funding disappears. And your reputation. Well, let's just say visionary tech CEO becomes corporate thief who bet the company on stolen IP. I didn't blink. He did. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached for the drive. You planned this, he muttered. I stood grabbing my bag. No, I said. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. But when I found you in my server 6 months ago, I started preparing. Not just to protect my system, but to protect myself. As I turned to leave, he asked one final question. How did you know I'd try to cut you out? I glanced over my shoulder, my expression unreadable. Sentinel Shield predicts threats before they happen, I said. I guess some of that rubbed off on me. The next morning, I arrived at Titan Tech not as an employee, but as something more powerful, a co-founder. A title born not of luck, but of foresight, grit, and a weaponized sense of justice. Rachel greeted me at the front with wide eyes and a clipboard. Mr. Holt said to take you straight to the boardroom. I gave her a small, polite nod and followed her down the corridor. Heels clicking steadily against the polished floors that had once felt like a battlefield. But today I walked with a different weight. My pace was calm, my pulse steady. No more shaking hands. No more second-guessing. The trap had been sprung. The game was mine now. Brandon was already inside, pacing the room, his tie knotted perfectly. His smile back in place, but it was thinner now. Forced. Hello. Investors are almost here, he said quickly, like we were back to being colleagues and this was just another milestone day. We'll keep it short and focused. Highlight the tech. Let them see the performance. I didn't bother acknowledging the obvious tension between us. Sentinel Shield is ready, I said instead. Just remember, don't issue any commands without my credentials in the chain. Otherwise, it'll flag them as breaches. He nodded tightly, and I caught a flicker of something beneath the polished CEO mask. Resentment, maybe. But buried beneath that was fear. Fear that I could take this all away from him in a single keystroke. The investors filed in soon after. Laptop. Designer watches. That too-practiced laughter of people used to sitting at the top of the world. They shook Brandon's hand, smiled at me like I was the assistant, then paused when he said, "This is Maya Lynn, co-founder and chief technology officer. She's the architect behind Sentinel Shield." The change in their demeanor was instant. One of them, a balding man with the subtle arrogance of someone who'd made millions before 30, turned to me curious. Amazing system. What inspired its development? I smiled gently, as if I hadn't just survived betrayal and corporate warfare. Understanding patterns, I said. Most cybersecurity systems respond to threats. Sentinel Shield learns from them. Predicts before it protects. It's like a living organism, evolving with every interaction. Brandon nodded beside me, pretending he had something to do with that insight. He didn't. He never did. The demo began. One by one, simulated threats were thrown at the system. DDoS attacks, phishing attempts, ransomware injections. Sentinel Shield swatted each of them away with seamless, adaptive countermeasures. The investors whispered among themselves, eyebrows raised, some already reaching for their phones, probably texting assistants to start due diligence for funding rounds. Then came the curveball. One of the investors, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, leaned forward. What happens if someone inside the network is the threat? I didn't miss a beat. Sentinel Shield identifies all anomalies, internal or external, I replied. It doesn't care about job titles or power hierarchies. If you're a risk, it flags you. Brandon flinched. Just barely. But I saw it. After the presentation ended, the room erupted with enthusiasm. Promises of funding. Invitations to conferences. Even a request for a private installation at one of the investors' personal hedge funds. But I stayed silent as Brandon basked in the attention because I knew, really knew, that this wasn't his victory. This was my proof. I had turned the system that was meant to be stolen into a sword of my own making. Later that afternoon, while we reviewed new partnership contracts with legal, I received a notification on my phone. Sentinel Shield. Authentication restored. Threat neutralized. System integrity secured. Creator protections active. I stared at it for a moment, the words like a quiet heartbeat. The system had done exactly what it was built to do. Protect itself. And now it was protecting me too. 3 months passed. Sentinel Shield became the gold standard for preemptive cybersecurity. It was deployed by banks, hospitals, government agencies. Anyone who couldn't afford a breach. It wasn't just revolutionary. It was necessary. Titan Tech's valuation exploded. Our name was on every magazine, every panel, every top 10 innovation list. Brandon handled business development. He was charming. Good at schmoozing, networking, keeping the PR wheels turning. I stayed behind the scenes. Focused on the tech. On refining Sentinel Shield. On adding new ethical guardrails, user transparency tools, and an evolving AI conscience that could differentiate between error and intent. We never spoke about the night I walked back into that boardroom. We didn't have to, because the power dynamic had shifted permanently. Brandon might have stolen the idea once, but he'd never control it again. The system wouldn't let him, and neither would I. One evening, after a major press release announcing our expansion into Europe, I found myself on the rooftop balcony of Titan Tech's new headquarters. Glass of wine in hand, wind brushing strands of hair across my face. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about resilience. Brandon's betrayal had nearly broken me. But instead, it built a version of myself I didn't know existed. I wasn't just a developer anymore. I was a guardian of my work, my name, and my future. And Sentinel Shield. It was more than code now. It was a mirror. It reflected who you really were. And for people like Brandon, that was the scariest vulnerability of all. I didn't realize how far I had come until I saw my reflection on a magazine cover. It was surreal. Lynn, the mind behind the machine. How one woman's vision reshaped cybersecurity. My hair was pulled back, my smile deliberate but distant. Eyes locked forward like I was already planning the next version of Sentinel Shield. I stood in the airport lounge, flipping through the article while waiting for a flight to DC. I had been invited to speak at a national cybersecurity summit. My first public appearance since Titan Tech's meteoric rise. The article was flattering, even reverent, but it failed to capture the part of the story I remembered most vividly. The cardboard box, the security guard trailing me, the empty echo of my office as I walked out, betrayed and blindsided. That wasn't the kind of detail the press liked. No one wanted to hear about how close genius always is to being buried under greed. But I remembered. Every line of code I wrote still remembered too. After the summit, a young developer, no older than 22, approached me during the networking session. "Ms. Lynn," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Sentinel Shield inspired my thesis. I just wanted to say thank you. How did you do it? Not just build it, but survive everything. Her eyes were wide, eager. She wasn't asking for code. She was asking for courage. I smiled gently. You protect what you build, I said. And when someone tries to steal it, you make sure the system they thought they understood turns out to be something much more dangerous. She laughed nervously, unsure if I was joking. I wasn't. Later that week, I got an internal ping from Sentinel Shield. One of its passive systems had flagged something inside Titan Tech's network. First, I thought it was a false alarm. But then I saw the credentials. Brandon Holt. He had tried to reroute part of the software architecture under a separate shell company. It wasn't a major breach. More like a test. A quiet probe to see if he could start carving out a shadow version of Sentinel Shield under a new brand. Didn't work. Sentinel Shield blocked the action, locked the credentials, and generated a 72-page report that landed in my inbox with a simple subject line. Internal threat neutralized. Executive breach attempt detected. I didn't confront him right away. Waited. A week later, I invited him to a strategy lunch, and met him at a high-end rooftop restaurant that overlooked the city skyline. Exactly the kind of setting he loved. Glass, steel, and status. We ordered drinks. Chatted about expansion opportunities. Discussed hiring for the European branch. Then I pulled out the report and slid it across the table. He didn't touch it. Just stared at the cover page. "I'm sure there's an explanation," he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned in, my voice steady and low. "Don't bother. Sentinel Shield already made one for you." His jaw clenched. "You built a system that spies on me." "No," I said. "I built a system that defends itself. You triggered it." He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked up, I saw a flicker of something that almost resembled regret. "I wasn't going to go through with it," he said. I sipped my drink. "That's not how security works, Brandon. Intent doesn't matter. Behavior does." He nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. "So what now?" I folded the report closed and returned it to my bag. "Nothing. Not unless you try again. This isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries." Then I stood, paid the bill, and left. That was the last time he ever tried to move against Sentinel Shield. He stayed in the company, handling sales and media relations. But our partnership became more of a silent ceasefire than a friendship. We nodded in meetings, sat beside each other at board presentations, and posed together at press events. But he never forgot what I had built. And he never forgot that it was watching him. In the months that followed, Sentinel Shield evolved again. It began to differentiate ethical breaches from technical ones. It learned to flag not just bad code but bad intent, deceptive contracts, concealed manipulation, data usage that violated the spirit of consent, even if it didn't technically violate policy. Some called it invasive. Others called it brilliant. Called it necessary. Because I knew better than anyone that the greatest threats don't always wear black hoodies and type in the dark. Sometimes they wear tailored suits and smile as they shake your hand. At our next board meeting, I proposed an expansion of Sentinel Shield's ethics framework. An optional package that would allow clients to monitor not just their networks, but their cultures. A watchdog for toxic leadership, systemic silencing, exploitation disguised as performance incentives. Half the board resisted at first. Then came the whistleblower cases. Then the lawsuits. Then the headlines. Within 3 months, the Sentinel Ethics Suite was our most requested upgrade. I sat in my office one evening, watching the city lights flicker below. On my screen, Sentinel Shield ran a self-assessment. System status. Stable. Threats. None detected. Creator status. Verified. Ethical guardrails. Active. Closed the laptop. Sometimes I still wondered what would have happened if I had walked away that day, taken the check, left the building, and never looked back. But then I remembered. They didn't just try to steal my code. They tried to erase my name from it. And the moment I let that happen would have been the moment I lost something much more valuable than software. I would have lost myself. There are moments in life when silence becomes louder than applause. It was during a tech industry gala, a black tie affair where the drinks flowed freely and egos filled the air like perfume. The host, some venture capitalist with a baritone voice and a love for dramatic pauses, stepped up to the podium. "And this year's award for outstanding innovation in cybersecurity goes to..." He dragged the sentence like a magician revealing his final trick. Sentinel Shield, developed by Titan Tech. The applause erupted. Brandon smiled, already standing to make his way to the stage, adjusting his cufflinks as he went. Then, led by co-founder and chief architect Lynn. The crowd pivoted toward me. For a second, Brandon froze mid-step, caught in the act of assuming credit that was no longer his to take. Then, to his credit, he quickly recovered and gestured toward me with faux generosity, as if it had been his plan all along. I walked to the stage calmly, my heels clicking against the marble floor like punctuation. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't tremble. I had already lived through the storm. This was just the sunlight afterward. "Thank you," I said into the mic. When I started working on Sentinel Shield, I wasn't trying to win awards. I was trying to build something that could outthink the threats we couldn't see coming. The ones we don't want to believe exist, especially the ones that come from inside our own walls. A few people clapped softly. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The real breakthrough wasn't just in the code, I continued. It was realizing that security isn't about paranoia. It's about preparedness. And it's about protecting not just our networks, but our integrity. I glanced toward Brandon. He didn't smile. But the next morning I woke to headlines. Tech Gala surprise. Lynn takes center stage at Titan Tech. The real brain behind Sentinel Shield steps into the spotlight. Brandon Holt fades to the background as co-founder shines. There were no quotes from him. No attempts at spin. For once he was silent. And the silence was deafening. Back at the office something had changed. The engineers spoke to me with more deference. New interns asked if they could shadow my sessions. Clients started requesting me personally on consultation calls. One afternoon I passed Brandon in the hall. He stopped and asked, "Did you plan that speech?" I looked at him and said, "No, I lived it." He didn't respond, just gave a faint nod and walked away. A few days later, I got a call from a journalist asking for an exclusive on the real story behind Sentinel Shield. I turned it down. Not because I wasn't ready to talk, but because I already had. The code spoke for itself. The system carried my fingerprints. The company now bore my name as much as it did his. And there was one thing Sentinel Shield never forgot to do. Track attribution. Every core component had metadata linking back to me. Every algorithm was timestamped. Every idea tied to my repository logs. In a world full of thieves in tailored suits, proof was power. And mine was unshakable. I turned my focus to the next generation of Sentinel Shield. One that wouldn't just monitor breaches and culture but would educate users on digital ethics. An integrated module that guided companies in creating safer, more honest tech environments. It wouldn't just catch bad actors, it would prevent their creation. When I unveiled the roadmap in a keynote livestream, the response was overwhelming. Universities reached out to integrate it into curriculum. Non-profits wanted to partner. Even government sectors requested briefings. Brandon watched all of this unfold. He never tried to stop it. He knew better now. One evening, I found a sealed envelope slipped under my office door. No name. Just a wax stamp with Titan Tech's original insignia. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "You built something bigger than both of us." I didn't see it then. Do now. B. I stared at the note for a long time. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Just acknowledgement. And maybe that was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Restoring my name. Restoring the integrity of what I'd built. Restoring my sense of power, not the kind that screams but the kind that stands. And as Sentinel Shield continued to evolve, protecting millions of systems across the globe, I realized something profound. The system they tried to steal became the fortress that kept them out. Not with walls, but with truth. And truth, once coded into the very DNA of your work, can never be stolen again. When you've been betrayed once, you start to see potential betrayal everywhere. But that's not paranoia. That's wisdom born from fire. I didn't become cold, I became precise. Every new hire I interviewed, every investor I agreed to meet, every partnership offer that crossed my desk, I didn't just vet their credentials. I watched how they looked at me. Did they see a name? Or a narrative they could exploit? Did they think I could be convinced? Or replaced? None of them knew I was watching for patterns, the same way Sentinel Shield did. By now, the system had reached more than 400 enterprise clients. Our monthly reports detailed preemptive security interventions, saved data breaches, and internal misbehavior caught before it metastasized. One hospital chain credited us with saving patient lives when our AI flagged an unauthorized firmware install on life support equipment. That one hit me differently, because it reminded me that Sentinel Shield wasn't just code or vengeance. It was impact, and impact couldn't be stolen. But just when I thought I'd made peace with everything, I received a letter, old-fashioned, stamped and handwritten. The return address, a small law firm in Connecticut. Inside was a single-page document. Legal, cold, precise. Brandon Holt was leaving Titan Tech. Effective immediately. He was selling his remaining shares to an investment firm and would no longer serve in any executive or board capacity. No warning. No meeting. No face-to-face. The accompanying note was shorter than the last one. Some legacies are better when you're not standing in the way of them. Good luck. B. I stared at it for a long time. The man who had once stolen my life's work, tried to erase me, manipulate me, control me, was walking away. Quietly. Should have felt like victory. But instead, it felt like closing a chapter of a book I had already read 100 times. I called an emergency board meeting the next morning. When everyone was seated, I stood at the front of the glass conference room, heart beating steady. I'm assuming you've all heard the news, I began. Brandon's exit will be finalized within days. But this isn't just a leadership vacuum, it's a chance. Clean break. I want to use this moment to pivot. One of the board members raised a skeptical brow. Pivot? In what direction? Toward transparency, I said. I want every Sentinel Shield client to have access to a new report, one that outlines our internal checks and balances. We'll show them what the system monitors, how ethical guardrails are implemented, and exactly what happens when a threat is detected, even if it's us. Another member scoffed. You want to audit ourselves? No, I said. I want to prove we don't have anything to hide. There was a pause. Then nods. Few slow claps. Unanimous. We launched the Open Integrity program 6 weeks later. Clients were shocked. Competitors called it reckless. One even tried to leak a story about us monitoring our own employees for unethical behavior. It backfired spectacularly. Turns out the public doesn't hate transparency. They crave it. Within months, we onboarded 3 government contracts and locked in a major deal with an international banking coalition. They didn't want just protection. They wanted trust. And trust was what I had spent my entire career earning back. Line by line, breach by breach. One night I stayed late in the office, the building quiet around me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as Sentinel Shield ran a diagnostics report. Total threats intercepted. 27,614. Internal threats prevented. 1,382. False positives, 0. Creator status, verified. Integrity level. Maximum. The final line made me pause. Integrity level. Maximum. Not because of a flawless system, but because of the flaws we had exposed and corrected. I looked out the window toward the skyline. Years ago, I would have traded anything to be in this position. Now, I wouldn't trade the journey for anything. Not the betrayal. Not the fear. Not even the night I packed that box and walked out feeling like nothing. Because that night was the reset button. That night was the moment I stopped being a developer and became a defender. Defender of my own name. Defender of truth. Defender of a world that desperately needed technology it could trust. And now I was building something even bigger. Not just for companies, but for creators, visionaries, builders who, like me, had been told they were lucky to be included at the table. To them, I was going to give a shield. So the next time someone tried to steal what they'd built, they'd be ready. I used to think I built Sentinel Shield for the world. Now I know I built it for people like me. People who are underestimated, overlooked. People who are told they're too emotional when they defend their ideas, too ambitious when they ask for credit, too much when they demand what they deserve. The final phase of Sentinel Shield wasn't about software. It was about access. We launched a new initiative called Sentinel Rise, a stripped-down open-source version of our core technology, tailored for indie creators, student startups, and underfunded teams building world-changing ideas in garages, basements, and dorm rooms. Places where code is written at 3 a.m. by people too tired to sleep and too passionate to stop. Within the first month, over 2,000 downloads. By the second international adoption, I started receiving emails, messages, handwritten letters from a team of women in Ghana developing an encrypted healthcare system. From a trans developer in Texas who used our ethics module to protect her project from being stolen by a professor. From a high schooler in India whose AI app for flood prediction got him on national news, and who credited Sentinel Shield with saving my dream before it was taken. That's when I knew. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was a revolution. I stood in front of a packed auditorium at our first Sentinel Creator Conference, wearing jeans and sneakers, because I wanted to remind them that you don't need a suit to build something powerful. Just vision. And resilience. And, if necessary, a system that watches your back. People will always try to take what you build, I told them. Sometimes with charm. Sometimes with contracts. Sometimes with silence so loud it drowns your voice before you ever speak. But when you protect your work, when you value your own worth, you take that power back. There was a pause. And then they stood. Hundreds of them. Clapping not for me but for themselves. For what they now knew they could do. Later that night, I sat alone in my hotel room, my laptop open beside me, a glass of water untouched. Sentinel Shield pinged softly on my screen. System status. Stable. Global deployments. 1,427. Creator attribution, verified. Ethics modules. Active. Legacy protection. Enabled. Threat level, minimal. Message. You have inspired a generation of defenders. I didn't cry, but I smiled. Because for the first time since this all began, since Brandon stole my idea, since I handed over that flash drive, since I clawed my name back from the shadows, I didn't feel like I was just surviving anymore. It felt like I was winning. And not alone. I was part of a movement now. One built not on anger but on accountability. Not on vengeance but on vision. A movement that understood the harsh truth. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who'll cut deepest. But also, sometimes the system you build to defend yourself becomes the sword others will wield to defend themselves. So to every builder, coder, writer, dreamer listening to this, if you've ever been burned, if they ever tried to cut you out, shut you up, or take your fire, light a new one. Because nothing scares thieves more than someone who learns how to lock the doors behind them. What started as betrayal became a lesson in power and protection. I learned the hard way that it's not enough to build something great. You have to defend it with everything you've got. Because when you do, your creation doesn't just survive. It thrives. This is Revenge Echoes. And if my story moved you, if you've ever had your ideas stolen or your voice dismissed, don't stay silent. Share your story. Reclaim your power. And subscribe for more stories where justice finds a voice, and revenge takes form.